I think it's valuable in any conflict, particularly a traumatic conflict, to ask the question, who is my enemy? Who is the enemy in a dynamic of conflict? And I'd like to suggest some ideas. The first thing is that the enemy is never the innateness or the essence of people. I may appear to be an enemy. Peter Sandhill may appear to be an enemy. The board of directors may appear to be an enemy. The facilitator body may appear to be an enemy. The community or the team may appear to be the enemy. However, it's useful to make the distinction between behavior and the essence of a human being. The essence of a human being is never the enemy. Now, if the essence isn't the enemy, and if we don't believe in a world in which we are born innately evil, whatever you define evil as, then the enemy must be in behavior. And behavior is an interesting thing because it does not emerge in isolation. It emerges ecologically. For example, in a culture that spends an average of 3 hours a day in kindergarten, middle school, and high school implementing science-based practices, meaning you go out and do a study on who has the healthiest relationships, who has the most sustainable relationships, who has the most enjoyable and valuable relationship, and who doesn't. And you avoid the practices that lead to chronic misery based on all of the data, and you include and elevate the practices that lead to the most satisfied human beings participating in the most rich, dynamic, sustainable, and valuable relationships. And you teach that in a mixture of learning skills, kinetically, witnessing, practice, conceptual understanding, and you teach that 3 hours a day throughout the education process. And you find people who know how to relate. Surprise, surprise. And not surprisingly, learning algebra, learning bullying, learning to conceal one's most vulnerable emotional truths for fear of shame and humiliation, learning that one's feelings are irrelevant because you're not going to get a single scientific hour of biological emotional literacy that shows how emotions affect the body and which feelings indicate which type of environment. Surprise, surprise, when you are in a culture in which you can go from college, well, let's start more basic, in which you can go from birth through a career without a single hour of formal emotional literacy, you get an emotionally illiterate culture. When you are illiterate in anything, if you are illiterate in words and you show someone a book, they cannot make head or tail of them. The odds are 50-50 if they point at a word whether it'll mean the thing that they want it to mean, because they are illiterate. They lack the technology of words. Well, when you go through your entire cultural programming without a single formal hour of science-based, not cult-based, not mysticism-based, where don't share that feeling, it's a bad feeling, that's not scientific, of poor science, when you don't get a single hour of science-based emotional literacy, of course, it's a 50-50 jumble. I thought that would make them happy, it made them miserable. I thought I thought being this way was intelligent, but I'm depressed, which is not intelligent. And I don't know what I'm doing in relationship. And so ignorance is, of course, a behavior when, as a cult, we sign our name, we give our blessing by causing and allowing generation after generation to go through the cult without a single hour of emotional literacy. It wasn't until very recently that I even knew the difference between a feeling and an emotion. Do you? Do you know the difference between a feeling and an emotion? Do you know that every feeling you have tells you about your environment more than it tells you about your feelings? Because the feelings that we have are produced by corollary patterns. For example, if every time a red flag is raised, you get hit over the face, the fact that you are cowering when a red flag is raised has very little to do with you. It has to do with a culture that would raise red flags and beat you, repeatedly creating a biological correlation. The fact that you cower around certain physiological stimulation, your ex-boy, shows up, your therapist asks you what you're feeling, has very little to do with you, and tells a sociologist an enormous amount about how that behavior has been correlated to things relating to your well-being and or trauma. Meaning, anytime you've had past correlation biologically around a given issue that is traumatic, you smell new mown hay, and because you were raped in new mown hay, your body tightens up and says, there's that new mown hay again. What's coming next? And so our feelings are not, this deep, unique thing that has something very personal to do with us. It's more that we have a personal relationship with our environment. And so you've never had a big penis jammed into your mouth when you were terrified of that and didn't know what that was about at 6 years old. So you think it's an interesting shape. A 20-year-old woman in a sexually abused, repressed culture who has that shape correlated with shame, with overwhelm, etc., sees the same shape, suddenly it's a frightening event. So our feelings tell very little about us and reveal the record of our personal relationship with our environment, as well, of course, of the default beliefs and assumptions that we created often in the absence of data. A child will generally make something about themselves. So if they're hit, a child is going to say, okay, why was I hit? It's all about me as a child. And so am I a bad person? One child says I'm a bad person. One child says I don't deserve anything. One child says I'm going to die. So there's some uniqueness in how that belief gets formed. But a child is not going to make up a story when they are hit at 5 years old that I'm a very safe person and I can be myself. I mean, that's not going to be in the probability field. Maybe it's I'm bad, maybe I'm going to die, maybe I'm unlovable, maybe I'm unforgivable. They'll make something up in that range, and you won't know until you do the digging deep later on, because if you ask the child, they're not conscious of what it is they're assuming. And if you just hit them, and it's because maybe they revealed something about themselves, they're not going to risk telling you the next thing because maybe you'll hit them again. Maybe they've decided it's just unsafe to talk. And then that gets glossed over, and for the rest of their life, anytime a certain person like this says, tell me something they expect to be hit, and they don't know why in a traumatically illiterate culture. And so behavior doesn't just come out of nowhere. It is a learned coping strategy for an emotionally illiterate, traumatically illiterate, abuse illiterate, relationally illiterate cult that willfully suppresses some of the most important skills in human living by absolutely refusing to train parents and absolutely refusing to train teachers and absolutely refusing to train co-workers and bosses on how to navigate that, and absolutely refusing to train its children, who then, of course, grow up illiterate in all of these key domains. So we're not looking in that extent, to that extent, we're not looking at Peter Sandhill and myself. We're not looking at Ann Watts and myself, at the facilitator bodies and myself. What we're looking at is cultural programs, survival strategies in a traumatically illiterate cult, in an emotionally illiterate cult, in a cult in which a growth-oriented individual can go through 4 decades and not know the difference between a feeling and an emotion. And I'll tell you, it's an interesting thing. I wrote an article about it just so I'd remember it. A feeling is something that comes out of the moment and is in the present. So if I slap you over the face, it's going to have impact, physiological, but much more significantly, it's going to have a psychological impact. And the impact is not going to be Dane's a great guy, or slaps are forms of great affection. No, it'll be I'm not quite safe, that's a sociopath. The impact will be something, but it will not leave you feeling safer. With more joy and wonder, it will leave you with a narrative that your environment is not conducive to optimal well-being, because an environment in which you get hit is not conducive to optimal well-being. And whatever you make the meaning, our mind will make a meaning of it. You're undeserving, I'm a jerk, whatever, it will make a meaning about it. And it'll be about you, or it'll be about me, or it'll be about both, or it'll be about the culture. It'll be a meaning. And whether that meaning has any coherence. I could be a Down syndrome child and not know anything, and you could make a meaning that I was a jerk, or I could have gone into a trance and projected some traumatic memory onto you and forgotten about it and not even know what I did, or I could be... It doesn't matter whether your meaning is true. The meaning you make will have an impact, and if it's a slap in the face, it will not be a positive impact. You may say it's a really sad thing that we don't teach our young men how to express their vulnerability, and that could be the impact, sadness. If you're sophisticated and understand the types of cults that produce violence at that level, it may well be sadness and grief. If not, it may be terror, or whatever. So what I want to look at are the behaviors that are the enemy of what we might call the optimal or the intelligent equation. Because for something to be the enemy on a relative scale, it has to produce a worse impact than an easily available alternative. If I could give you a massage with the same amount of energy as the slap on the face, a short massage perhaps, and you felt great and I felt great, but I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to do that mentally. I didn't know how to do that emotionally. I didn't have a paradigm in which that would make sense. And I did know how to do the slap in the face because I've gotten plenty of those. And so that's what I knew how to do. But there's an easily available alternative that creates more well-being with less energy, or with the same amount of energy, or reduces human suffering. Because it's on a gradient scale. You start with this is painful, and progress is this is a little less painful. And then that's slightly beneficial, and that's more beneficial, and that is as beneficial as we can possibly imagine. That's the optimal equation. The pattern of energy distribution in a form called intelligence, the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources are transformed into sustainable, win-win human well-being. The measure of an individual's or a culture's or a group's or a teacher's or anything, the measure of intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into sustainable well-being, at least for a human being. If you're a rock, it may not be particularly intelligent to make a human happy, particularly if that human's happiness comes by blasting you into slabs of rock or whatever it is. But for a human being, intelligence is creating well-being for human beings, oneself included. And so in the evaluation of the enemy, what we're evaluating is the optimal pattern of energy, the sustainable optimal pattern of energy, the intelligent form of energy, the intelligent form of behavior, and the behavior that deviates from that symmetry. And I say that symmetry because symmetry is more intelligent. Symmetry is more graceful and efficient than asymmetry. That's why we have wheels for bicycles, symmetrical rims, as opposed to squares. Squares are not as symmetrical. They may have an equal, evenness of lines, but from a center point, there are these awkward corners that if you drive bicycles with square wheels rather than round wheels, you will have a very bumpy ride. And many of us have very bumpy lives because the symmetry of our pattern of energy is incredibly inefficient, because we haven't even turned our gaze as a cult on those arenas. So they're wobbly and bent and smashed and trashed by our parents and trashed by our quote lovers, trashed in this, and it's just this horrible mangled shape that's put on there for a wheel, and we go up and down and all over the place, and it's incredibly inefficient, incredibly painful, and it is not about the essence of the human being. It's not about the essence of the soul. It's not about God and Goddess. It's very specific about the deviation from a more symmetrical, a more graceful pattern of energy that we don't know how to do within the level of consciousness created. It goes back to, that Einsteinian problem that the intelligence needed to solve a problem is greater than the intelligence out of which the problem is created. Meaning we have to grow before we can solve the problem that we've created as a species, as a cult, as individuals. If we don't grow, we may solve that problem by creating another problem. Particle thinking rather than ecological thinking. Ecological thinking is about the circle. It's about the feminine. Particle thinking is the masculine. What do I do with this garbage? Oh, I know. I'll throw it in a garbage truck. Problem solved. Thank heavens, right? Thank heavens for particle Western thinking. Problem solved. No more garbage. And what does the garbage truck do? Oh, it's easy. We take it to a transfer station. Problem solved. The garbage truck is empty. And what do we do from there? Well, let's take bigger trucks and haul it away. Problem solved. Transfer station empty of garbage. And what do we do from there? Where do we put all these big trucks? Let's see. We could transform it all back into great resources. We could make waste that was highly useful, so there isn't actually any waste. We could no. That's complicated. Let's dig a big hole in the ground and put it there. And then what do we do when the hole fills up and we've got hundreds of feet of piles of this stuff that we don't know what to do with? Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. We haven't gotten to a level of thinking that is bigger than the level of consciousness that creates the illusionary language of garbage. Garbage is simply that which we lack the sophistication to do something about. Rather than point the finger on our level of consciousness and saying, there is no garbage. Nature doesn't have any garbage. It hasn't had any garbage in 5 billion years. There is just a constant dance of evolution and ecology and transformation. There is no garbage. So there's no problem with nature. There's a problem with our thinking. No, it couldn't be. Couldn't be that I made a mistake, so no. It is garbage, and we just haven't figured out what to do with garbage, as opposed to we lack the sophistication to eliminate the illusion of garbage and create and design things that are very useful as they then turn into other things, the way nature has worked for 5 billion years, until someone came up with the illusion of garbage, and then came up with a whole host of inept methods for disposing of massive amounts of resources that our ecology needs to come back into symmetry, back into balance, but which we lack the consciousness to do something about. There's no garbage feelings either. There's no garbage thoughts. We lack the processing capacity. We lack the intelligence to eliminate the illusion of waste. There are no garbage people. There are no garbage things. There are no garbage materials. There are no garbage thoughts. There are no garbage feelings. Garbage does not exist except in the warped, crude, hacked up conception of a cult that is too zoomed in on the particle and has lost the dance with the circle. So within this framework, one of the things that is essential to understand is that for the most intelligent system, every single player, all the community members that didn't want to respond and didn't want to look at sexual abuse and certainly didn't want to help a fellow community member, all the team members that didn't want to get caught in the middle of an argument with the facilitators, all the board members who weren't expecting to actually have to do something with their legal authority, all the facilitators that didn't want to fight with each other and so tried to cover up the abuse, and all of Peter Sandhill's various split personality, I want this, but then I'm going to behave this way, and I don't know how to piece it all together. All of my rantings, all of the trauma, there's no garbage in this equation. It's all necessary ecological energy for an optimum outcome. The challenge is how to put the pieces together. And this is normally very easy when we're dealing with balsa wood. You get a model plane. The optimum template is a great model plane that flies. You see, the tailwind, the tail wing doesn't argue and say, don't glue me on there. That's, who told you you could tell me what to do? The propeller doesn't say it's not Sunday. I never get put onto a plane on Sunday. On a Monday. That has to be done. This. Why didn't you know? Well, why didn't you tell us? The raw material of things doesn't argue. Doesn't have a whole host of traumatic memories around. Don't put me near that wing. I don't care if we crash. I don't care if this plane gets thrown in the dump. I will not be put next to that other wing. They insulted me, back when I was 3, and besides, I hate red. Why are the decals red? Nobody consulted me about that. And so, if objects, if the rest of nature behaved like the human ego at its current level of sophistication, the entire universe would be an utter mess of incomparable suffering and pain. As it is, that's reserved for the human condition. Everything else, pretty much going along quite happily, as it is wont. Our little domains, not so much. The level of consciousness framed within this little zoom-in lens called the human ego. This is me, and that's all that other stuff that I belong to and I come out of and I go back into, and all that's not me. Another illusion. I'm not connected to the ecology that gives birth. So this is the crisis. The enemy at its core is the limitation in human consciousness. Now, fear is a great teacher. Pain is a great teacher. It produces consciousness when we don't want it to. I would like to be able to keep drinking and not crash my car into the bulwark and then be arrested for murdering a 5-year-old that I ran over. I'd like to keep drinking without the consequence of drinking. So I'm going to do that until I kill a child. And it's painful, not the least of which I'm in jail. Then there's, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Then everyone thinks I'm a monster. It's painful. So I guess I have to learn that drinking ruins lives. I don't want to learn that. I don't want to deal with reality, but it's too painful not to. So I'm going to. Pain and fear are incredibly valuable infusers of consciousness. You cannot dissociate and pretend nothing's wrong while someone's pulling your nails out one by one. You're gonna come into a reality where you're gonna ask yourself, what went wrong? What went wrong? And sometimes when the fear is loud enough and the pain is loud enough, we break out of our little boxes of preconceived notions. We cease the continual perturbations of our stubborn ignorance, and we actually learn something. And then, lo and behold, reality gets better, because if you infuse reality with consciousness, and you understand that the core in human nature is the desire, the need to survive, to feel secure, to have sense of love and belonging, to develop self-esteem, that these are a hierarchy of human needs. And so if you learn from pain and fear, or by good teachers, by a healthy cult, how to do things well, it's fun. And so you're going to continue. If you refuse to learn and grow, it's going to be very, very painful and scary, or it's going to be great. So one enemy that we deal with is the refusal to learn what we don't know. It's an incredible hubris of human egoism that we live in a reality where 99.9% of all reality is unknown, a fact. Do you know the distance in centimeters from Jupiter and star 3 number 389? What about star 398? What about star 3,988,000? Do you know any of those dimensions? Do you even know that you don't know them? Well, that's just one little speck in all the universe of all that we don't know that we don't know. 99.9% of all reality is unknown. I don't know it, you don't know it, and boy, we don't want to know it. Leave me alone. Just let me stay in my little cocoon of stuff that I know and repetitively do. It's boring as hell. It's often quite mediocre, but at least I know it, and I'm clinging to that desperately in my terror of the unknown, a side effect of a traumatized culture. To the degree a cult is traumatized is to the degree it is terrified of the unknown. The unknown is a mystery of wonder and delight until it's whacked you over the head a few times and you realize every time I go out there, it seems like I'm half dead. It's like, who knows what's there? Let me just stay in my little tiny little world where I just pick the same boyfriends I always pick because I know them. I mean, they may be shitty, but I sure know them. And I'll pick the same little women as I always pick because, it's so nice when they always act the way I knew they would and da-da-da. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's so comforting to be in my little cocoon of known energy. So this myopia, this blind terror of the unknown that helps push away any little knock at the door. Rumi talks about the uninvited guest, the feelings you don't want to feel, the thoughts you don't want to admit are in there, the parts of a self that come out of the light and the dark shadow and say, here I am a part of you, own me. And we say, no, you've nothing to do with me. No, I may have stuffed you in there pre-verbally. I may have, been denying you right and left. I may have been running half my life from you, but you have nothing to do with me. I'm running just because I like jogging. There's nothing to do with my terror of facing my envy or bitterness or my joy and my beauty. Oh my goodness, it's like, get away from me, lock the doors, stay in the dark. And so, this is one of the greatest tragedies, of our parenting protocols today, is that there is not a child in this country who has not been repeatedly traumatized by the time they have language. And we don't even know what trauma is as a culture. We don't understand the biology on an infant. We are not going to teach that infant how to get in touch with the subliminal meanings they made that TV show mean. They made that video show mean. They made the raised voice mean. They made, when they saw that on the news, when we are so dissociated from so much of ourselves that we don't even know how much of ourselves we're dissociated. And boy, do we not want those unknown guests to come back. And so we run. We hide in our little hovels of cult consciousness, discuss who won, who bribed the Oscars this year or whatever to watch whatever kind of mildly above mediocre movie got made to, this time. But so little of it really means something to the parts of us that matter. But we don't know that because the parts of us that matter are long buried in a dark or light shadow that somehow doesn't fit within the stereotype of our gender, of our generation, of our little cult, what it means to be an American or this or that. So this terror is the enemy because of its impact in a cult in which we know so little about so much that is important, about love, about sustainability, about human relationships. This willful ignorance is the enemy. It's the enemy when I don't ask what to do about certain things I can't put words to. But, and just move on, go along with the cult thing, not knowing so much. And not having the fit that I've so often wanted to have. Say, everyone stop. My life's going forward, but I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what's going on here. And everyone's asking me to just keep moving on, to let go of the past. But there are so many recurring cycles that are just coming around and round again, and they're not being dealt with. And I don't even have words for them, because this is a cult that doesn't talk about them. Not in therapy, not in friendship, not in little activities. The mediocrity of our activity list in our cult is phenomenal. 10 billion things that we could do on thousands of dimensions. And we're like, let's see, what should I do? I could get a bite to eat. I could wear this, or I could wear this. And if we're getting a bite to eat, what would it be? Would it be Mexican or this? Or we could catch a movie, a novel idea. It's like, it's such a dried menu of repetitive, boring events relative to the totality of the 10,000 cults in human history. And so it's like over and over and over again, a bite to eat, what to wear, catch a movie, and what movie would it be? Will it be the action flick? Will it be the this, the this, the this? The same categories, the same format, no 20-hour movies, no 5-minute movies, no, just 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours. Should it be this one or this one? It's a very dried menu, but it keeps us safe from the unknown. Bored, but safe. That boredom and hunger for familiarity is the enemy when there is so much to learn. So that's the first behavior. And in the facilitator relationship, that behavior began when I wrote an 8-page letter more than 10 years ago, talking about shame in the facilitator and team dynamic, talking about the incoherence of a mission statement that asks team members to commit to creating a world where everyone wins, an intern's commitment to live that, but not be taught how to do it. And the confusion that comes up, and the superhuman shame dynamic that comes when people very good at a very narrow set of behaviors, performing the facilitator role in a workshop, get up and play the superhuman role that very few people can play, but then don't own the fallout of saying we're committed to a world in which all of you win, but we're not committed to learning what your win is. It's a pretty weak commitment, but we're not committed to telling you that either. And we're not committed to telling you how you can resolve a lose-lose dynamic into a win-win dynamic. And we're not committed to giving you metadata on how well we're doing and how well the community is doing. And we're not committed to getting feedback about how our teachings help you win and lose and sharing that metadata. We're just committed to the language. And then there wasn't even the commitment to that because I didn't get a reply. So you can see how the commitment not to deal with difficult topics simply by ignoring anyone who writes a confronting long letter. How many people in the community write an 8-page letter outlining flaws within the facilitator body, 1, and 2, ways that they could be addressed, and 3, ask for engagement. And of those that do, how many have my experience of being minimized in the extreme, having to nag, have you read the letter? Have you read the letter? Have you read the letter? Oh, 6 months later, you read the letter. Amazing, amazing. Such eagerness to learn and grow. And then, okay, what are you going to do about it? What's your reply? Well, we're not going to do anything about it. And are you going to thank me for writing such a long letter and encourage everyone else to write their letters? Oh, no, you're not going to do that. So we don't want to know what we don't know. And how are we going to train people not to come forward with stuff that confronts us with our own blind spots and our own ignorance? We'll wear them down. We won't honor them. We won't respond. We won't let it matter. We won't encourage anyone else to do that. And so this creates a pattern. Whenever you set up a pattern where you reward someone for silence and you punish them for speaking, by making it more energy intensive to speak with no benefit, at least we're getting selective here, more energy intensive to confront us on our shit, you've got a defense up. It says we don't want to know, so we're going to cause anyone who tells us this a little bit more pain than will cause you if you don't tell us. Just save the time. Don't write us a nice 8-page letter next time, because it won't do any good. We're not going to read it. Then after you nag us, we'll read it. We're not going to do anything. So just do us all a favor and don't tell us things that we don't know. And we'll all be much happier. You won't have to write letters. We won't have to do anything about them. The world can go on exactly as it's been going on before. We can say that this is commitment to a world where everyone wins. We don't need to be troubled by the metadata of how many people in our community are drinking, failing, unfaithful, how many people in our facilitator body don't know what they're doing. We don't need to be troubled with this data because the language is so lovely in such a grandiose mission statement. And so here you have a divergence from the symmetry of stated commitment and actual commitment. So you've got pain when you diverge in that way. That's the science. You turn your blinkers left as if you're going to merge left, and then you suddenly shock the driver on the right side by quickly going into that lane. You diverge your words, your indication from your behavior. You create pain. And you think, well, it's so nice. I can say the words, how committed we are, and then we just aren't going to do it. We're not going to do it. So we get the benefit of both until it crashes. You see, this is a crash. What's going on here is a crash. For years, that little indicate left, turn right whenever it suits us has been working. People have been rewarding the facilitators for their stated noble intentions, but not asking, okay, so what does it mean that I'm suicidal? And I wrote to you all, and that doesn't mean it. How does that fit with your commitment to me winning? I'm not only not winning, I'm suicidal. Well, we're committed to people winning except when they're committing suicide. That's our except. And we're also committed to people winning except when they're in our community. And then we're committed to winning except when our team is failing chronically to have sustainable, loving relationships. In all other areas, the whole world, we're committed to winning, but not these things. And yeah, we're not committed to winning when you hire us for therapy and it goes wrong. It's like, could you just go away? We're really clear this isn't about us. But we are committed to the world winning. You see, when that leads to a wreck, when that dissonance leads to a wreck, leads to pain, then you either wake up and grow with that pain, and you learn, integrity, integration, words and behavior, have to do a better job in that domain, or you crash and burn. and another takes your place. And they have to learn the same lesson. We are not isolated individuals. If high crashes and burns, there will be another that is better, that learns from that mistake that comes into the breach. If high grows and goes forward, it will be more conscious than it was before. Because the same level of consciousness needed to create this train wreck is not adequate to get us out of it. Now, that becomes particularly problematic if we are committed to saying that this isn't a train wreck. Nothing's wrong, nothing's wrong, no. It's all carefully wrapped up and kept secret, but there's nothing going on there. Because then the pain grows. And so these are the behaviors that are the enemy of the symmetry. The symmetry. We're committed to the whole world winning, and we begin that commitment by asking every one of our clients how much they are winning in each of the areas important to them. 1. 2, how well what we're doing is helping or hurting them in those areas. And 3, what we can do to help and how we can organize as a community to ensure more winning. And then we measure again. That works. That's a level of integrity that actually adds value. And I want to talk about the equation that's going on in this relationship. The equation that's going on at its best is that in every role, there is a conscious win-win. And so let's take the therapist equation. I will set aside time as a client. I will earn money to give to you. I will give you my innocence and my trust to follow your influence in the belief that my well-being will go up as a result. That is the trust. I risk all of these resources in the belief that you know what you're doing, and that because you know what you're doing more than I know what I'm doing, otherwise why do you hire a professional? I mean, if you know how to plumb your house and you have a plumbing leak better than a plumber does, well, first of all, that doesn't hold up. Why do you have a leak if you know how to plumb your house better than a plumber does? If you know that very well, there is no leak. But, okay, you still know better, but you made a mistake. Well, why do you hire a plumber who doesn't know as much as you? Now, the belief in hiring a therapist, a professional, a teacher, is that they know more than you do. Now, if I don't, as the metaphorical abstract client, if I don't set aside my work and prioritize time to go to a therapist, if I don't make the money needed to pay the therapist, if I don't decide that paying that therapist is the most important thing I can do with that money, and if I don't believe and trust in the competency of the therapist doesn't have a job. Period. That's the equation. At an archetypal level, lots of clients have to do all of that, or a therapist doesn't have a career. It doesn't matter if she or he is the most brilliant therapist on the planet. If I don't care, if I don't believe, if I don't trust, and if I don't prioritize, and if I don't make resources and give resources, the therapist doesn't have a career. So what's the therapist's job in the symmetry of that relationship? It is to validate that faith, that trust, that honor, that priority in every way imaginable. And if she does it in excess of my expectation and belief, meaning if I went in depressed and anorexic, and I thought maybe I could come out feeling 50% less depressed, but my whole depression lifts and my anorexia to boot, then we have a sustainable dynamic. The therapist is exceeding my trust and expectation. So it continues. That mathematics works. I will tell my friends, go and see so-and-so. It's great. Go and see them for one problem. You may luck out like me and they'll fix 2 problems. It'd be wonderful. Well worth the money. So the industry grows. So the person grows. So the career grows. Now, if the therapist violates that trust and I come out worse, then the career collapses, unless amends are made to balance that out. So this is a behavior. It's a mathematical formula. Now, if the therapist violates that formula, they are not only violating their own career, they're violating the well-being of their client. Now, if a client doesn't tell other people, watch out, you could have your life ruined by, you call this plumber, and they flooded the whole house, and then sent me a bill, and then refused to clear up the damage, ruined my life for 2 years, had to move, had to rebuild, then the permits, oh my goodness, then they went bankrupt. It was a nightmare. Never work with plumbers, do it yourself. Well, suddenly plumbers don't have a career anymore because they haven't protected the symmetry of that agreement, that trust. So within the mathematical formula of that relationship, earning and delivering on that trust is the sacred linchpin of whether that relationship wheel grows and goes round and round or dies and is discarded as a failed evolutionary experiment. There's no other outcome, because as long as the therapist determines that more pain will come in this situation if you hire them, that will spread. And nobody wants to pay money and pay innocence and take time off work and prioritize the time and go there and risk vulnerability and risk innocence to end up worse off than they did at the beginning. To end up realizing that as issues come up about that, the professional doesn't actually care enough about them to be competent, to repair, etc. And so they actually get the impact of all of that abuse, etc., as being, you're not really that valuable. Not to me, not to your boss, not to your ex-lovers, not to your government, not to your parents. You're just not that valuable. You see, and when we deliver that message as a cult over and over again to men and women, it has impact. We start treating ourselves poorly because the message is, we're just not that valuable. We weren't valuable enough for our government or any of the neighbors to teach our family about trauma. So they just traumatized us because they didn't know, because we weren't worth learning for. Much like the next generation in a trauma-illiterate culture is getting that exact same message. Why should I keep living? I'm in pain. Nobody values me. Let's kill myself. It's a remarkable phenomena. It is a remarkable phenomena to be consuming more natural resources per square inch of any species in history, and of more than 90% of all the cults that have ever existed, of the 10,000 cults on this planet, that you and I in the West are consuming more energy, time, money, natural resources. I'm looking particularly at natural resources here. The 100 metric tons of garbage that this little body is going to generate before death. The 90,000 gallons of gas that this little body is going to spew out into the atmosphere. Transporting, driving, flying, making the various things, transporting them again, making the things that made the things that we bought. You see, there are giant machines pumping out gasoline in factories. to make the little tchotchkes that we buy and throw away because, oh, that's boring. And then there are giant machines making the giant machines. And then there are giant machines transporting those giant machines and building those factories. 90,000 gallons of gas. Poof. For this little body in one lifetime. It's like, where can you find such exorbitance in the history of the planet per unit, per inch of skin? It's here in the hubris of our cult. And we're not even happy. We're suicidal. You know, you don't find monkeys committing suicide for the most part. Fish are not going to produce any garbage. There's not going to be a single gallon of gas in the air for a fish. And their life is okay. They're not trying to kill themselves. And so this is a very, very, laughable equation of our cult to give us a sense of how far we're awry. And it doesn't pay to be arrogant, to have so little humility when we're in this predicament. It pays to assume that in all that 99% of stuff that I don't even know that I don't know, I better pay attention when someone knocks on the door and says, hey, I don't think you know this. Hey, this is a big deal. Hey, listen. Hey, this is an issue. It takes a stunning degree of arrogance to say, that's not my problem, it's not my issue, da-da-da-da-da. Well, whose is it? Whose is it when we all belong to this cult? One of the most unintelligent cults in human history, using the metric of the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources is transformed into human well-being. But we're not even intelligent enough to teach ourselves what intelligence means. Many of us think it's the ability to do algebra or calculus or create a nuclear bomb. And you have to wonder, well, how exactly is that intelligent if it's leading to suffering as opposed to well-being? It's a pretty basic question that we will not find in any of our schools. Doesn't sound very intelligent to me. And so it is these deviations, willful ignorance, arrogance, blindness, refusing to think, just tolerating massive amounts of suffering and waste without having a revolution, that are the betrayals of this trust, the trust of our soul to trust this ego with figuring out what to do with this landscape of reality, the betrayal of ourselves, the betrayal of our potential, of that optimal future. And so that's the first big betrayal, the willful ignorance, the lack of humility, the lack of training and expertise, followed by willful ignorance. Then we have the deviation between the expectation and the reality. We're committed to all of this, but that's not what's actually happening. And just turn the other way. The behavior of controlling information is part of the willful ignorance protocol. Disconnect email lists, etc. So what we're looking at is the specific behaviors in all concerned, because that's also part of the myopia of chauvinism, is to think, no, it's these are bad people, these are good people. No. Reality is created by causing and allowing. Everyone in the field plays a role in one of those categories. If you don't think it's your problem and you do nothing because of that idea, be suspicious of that idea, because that's the kind of thinking that's brought us into the present world. It's not my problem. It doesn't seem to be anyone's problem that our cult is heading into a nosedive of pain and suffering while consuming more energy than any other species on the planet per pound, and more energy in this cult than almost any cult in human history. The Aztecs were not generating 90,000 gallons of gasoline per lifetime. The Aztecs were not generating 102 metric tons of garbage. We are. Where is a cult anywhere in this species' history that's managed to pull off so much energy consumption for so much mediocrity to the point where suicide is an intelligent plan to escape? Where are they? The fish aren't doing it. The whales aren't doing it. So it pays to let go of some of the hubris and start paying attention. Now that's, I think, the biggest crime. The passionate desire not to know and not to respond to what's right in front of us. Once we get rid of the numbness and the hubris and the stupidity that says it's not my problem, no, that's Dane and Peter's problem, it's nothing to do with me. I had nothing to do with this cult. I wasn't born here. All their programming, it's just theirs. It didn't just come out of the same environment that we're all living in. I'm sure I'll be able to follow the same cult doctrine, and my marriage will work wonderfully, even though 98% of everyone else's doesn't. Mine just will. Magical thinking as opposed to technical and engineering thinking. Fortunately, we don't unanimously apply this level of stupidity to all areas of our life. I'm going to inject arsenic in my body, and I will be positive, and I will live despite the 99.9 statistic that I will die. I'm not going to change anything, but I will have a great life, despite the fact that the vast majority of people in our cult are quite miserable. And that large amounts of energy consumption isn't helping. It's making them fat. It's cluttering up this and that and the other. It's confusing them because the advertisers keep telling us it's going to make us happy and never seems to do it. So it's just very confusing. And everywhere we look on media, our attention is sold to the highest bidder, and the people who bid the highest for our attention are the people who say, buy this crappy thing that you don't need and your life will be wonderful. So we go out and buy it. Our brains being hacked by, beautiful scenery being correlated with these products. Porsches always have traffic-free roads. You buy a Porsche, you've got the same crappy traffic as everyone else. You can't drive 140 miles an hour. It's just in advertisements that there's no traffic. And so it is not particularly helpful to be confused that way. So these are the deviations. And so what I've done in all of this project in numerous ways is I've sliced down the impacts. The enemy is not the people. It's the map being used by the people. Now, everyone is involved. I'm involved. If I had known what abuse was before all this began, I wouldn't have allowed myself to be abused. It's that simple. I didn't know what abuse was. I didn't know what trauma was. I didn't know what sexual abuse was. I didn't know what therapeutic abuse was. And I didn't know how to protect myself. Well, if you think you've been raised in the same cult that I have, and that you know all of that stuff just magically, just by being an American or whatever it is, give it a shot. I think that's faulty thinking. Now, if you don't know, then you're as vulnerable as I am until the community owns this as a central issue and embraces a passion for learning what they don't know, they don't know, and for owning the patterns in the entire cult. It's also, I think, fair to say that no facilitator or board member set out to create as much suffering as possible. They did that through willful ignorance and not knowing what they didn't know and not wanting to know what they didn't know. That'll do it. In massive amounts of pain and ignorance, blocking out data is all you need to have a complete and utter train wreck. The people are not the enemy. So it may play out that this train wreck leads to the end of high. It may lead to my death. It may lead to any number of things. But the people at the core and the natural environment around us will not be the fault. The fault will lie in the behaviors, which will be based on either science, which works better and better, or ignorance and fear, which tends to reproduce as more ignorance and fear until you embrace the data and work with things. So that is really the only enemy here. And we will see whether the very specific behaviors that break the contract between the client and the professional. Because the thing that, while we're all equally participating in causing and allowing these types of patterns throughout our culture, our family, our therapeutic relationships, our professional relationships, etc., we are all responsible, meaning we are able to respond and we're not doing it. We're not having a fit that our kids are going to school today learning drivel when it comes to emotional literacy. We're not having a fit about that. Why not? Aren't they worth it? See, what message can they get other than we know this cult sucks emotionally and relationally, but we're not doing anything about it. This isn't commitment to winning. It's commitment to insanity, and to a cruel one at that, in which we pretend we're the opposite of what we are. So in that sense, there's only one thing that changes: behavior. And a great guideline in any of the areas that the facilitators and board have engaged around this is to do the opposite of what they've done. So when Peter said he's really clear this has nothing to do with him, just like most of the high participants and team who didn't want anything to do with it, just reverse that. This has everything to do with all of us, and we're going to solve it. That'll work. Just do the opposite of what creates the train wreck, and you start doing repair. Now, of course, when you crash into a wall, whether it's a 20-passenger, 20 carriages in a train crashing into a wall, or taking a human being and dropping them 100 feet, you don't just say, up, I've got it now, let's rewind and pretend it never happened. The financial, the physical, the emotional impact of years of willful abuse continues. There's momentum in the density of physicality. But you immediately stop creating the next abuse cycle with somebody else. That gets averted instantly, and you never have to deal with it because you don't create it. And the other stuff, you have to pick up the pieces. And if you were the one that put the concrete wall in the middle of a train track, and killed X number of people and destroyed a $20 million train, well, you've got to, begin the process of making amends. And perhaps die without fully having made those amends, because you may not have $20 million to repair the damage of willful stupidity in that area. That's the grief. That's the grief. When we have the ability as individuals to create more pain, more suffering, more damage than we have the sophistication to heal. Well, thus the cycle of suffering, the cycle of karma, etc., as we go round and round, developing more and more sophisticated technology until we can lift out of the burden, lift out of the pain that our current level of consciousness is creating. So in conclusion, our current level of consciousness has co-created every one of the wounds present around this dynamic. Almost everyone involved in a large degree has disowned it to a large degree, which means it will continue, and it's not particularly personal. The patterns of behavior that come from disowning, willful ignorance, etc., will not resolve this now or in the future. It will, the momentum of unnecessary suffering will increase. Now, although we are all able to respond, and thus responsible, meaning you want a life with more love in your life, etc., well, a great way to do the exact opposite of that is when people are in desperate trauma, tell them it's not your problem, and you'll have tons of suffering infecting your life as that trauma ripples out within the community like a virus. And suddenly you have a life of trauma yourself. So that's one way to ensure that you will be regularly traumatized is don't help people in trauma and say it's not your problem. That works. And we are creating more and more loneliness and suffering in this cult by the day. So changing that, it is our responsibility. I have the ability and I have the willingness to respond. Easy. What do? I'm traumatically illiterate. I'm emotionally illiterate. Start reading, start practicing, have humility, ask questions, prioritize the issue, value yourself and our future enough to create that. That's behavior. This doesn't change your innate worth. It changes the complexity and the beauty of the reality you're able to create in the midst of all this suffering and all that. So that is, an easy reverse. And let's do as little as possible, a good high strategy over the time. Let's do as little as possible under duress to let's do as much as we possibly can immediately. It's a different behavior, creates a different reality. So as things are moving in terms of part of my, and there's one other big thing. Peter Sandhill did all of his abuse for money under professional auspices. So there is a huge difference in accountability, meaning if a sick patient comes in with tuberculosis and the doctor doesn't cure the tuberculosis but injects arsenic, gives the patient AIDS, gives them a bill, and then discharges them for the hospital, that doctor can go to prison. That doctor can be disbarred, lose their medical license, hopefully. And then if they cover up the abuse and let other people be vulnerable to the same poor treatment, there's a whole karmic and technical impact on all of that. That's, and so I'm also participating in being slow to escalate priority around this because I've, had PTSD and trauma and all of that, and it is horrendously painful. This whole area is the most painful area of my entire life. That's incredible that the most painful area of my entire life is birthed in a public nonprofit that I attended 100 events and worked with 4 facilitators to do the exact opposite. That's a huge rupture. That's such a big crisis that it makes sense to say, let's scrap the entire organization and rebuild from scratch, or let's make it the #1 priority to transform rapidly. None of this little as possible. No. Pull out all the stops and transform. That's a behavior that works. But do the little egos involved have the ability to respond, the willingness and ability to respond in a way that works, or only to create more pain and suffering as it ripples back into their world? That's the question. That's the question. So we are all able and willing to respond, and we all need to learn this stuff. This is not for the high facilitators. Meaning all these websites, etc., they're 10% for the facilitators. They're over 50 years old. They're committed to blindness in a number of ways. And so they may never get it. But if you, as a therapist, if you as a participant, if you as a team member, make the enormous mistake of thinking this is not about you, that somehow your culture is completely different than the culture we all grew up in, and that somehow, it won't affect you if high blows up like this or something and disappears, or if you don't understand that, you're suffering from a tremendous delusion that is incredibly unkind to yourself, to those you care about, to me, to the facilitators. This is for all of us. This is for me. I'm learning in the process of all this process. And I'm making it all public at great energy expense, specifically so that you have a chance to do it easier. And if you dishonor that generosity and kill it, creating the reptilian brainstem in a deteriorating cult of sociopathic behavior, because you don't understand the bigness of this, your children, the rest of your lives, will be that much more mediocre in a that much more suffering cult. We will learn this as a species. We will learn it. The only question is how much pain and fear and trauma it's going to take to wake us up before we choose a much easier way, which is, hey, this is my issue. I want to help. Thank you for bringing it up. This is me. I'm getting to talk to different parts of me. Welcome to my guest house. Your problems are my problems. I honor the patterns of energy that come before me as something I am able and willing to respond to, beginning with learning tons of stuff that my cult is not going to tell me, that this information makes available. The information is not your enemy. The feelings that come up about it are not your enemy. The essence of all the people involved are not your enemy. You may be, in your behavior, the enemy of your own well-being and the enemy of my well-being and all of that, and I may, in my behavior, be stepping on things that I don't understand. We are in a relationally illiterate cult on so many levels. And you probably, if you're raised in this cult, don't have the skill to coach me on how to succeed with you. Very few people ever have in my entire life, and so why would you be any different? But we have at least the ability in this material to begin to acknowledge how much we have to learn, that it's important, that it's on all of us, and that the sooner we embrace that, the faster we'll start winning.